Welcome to another explainer. We're jumping straight into a seriously chilling premise today by starting our descent not underground just yet, but high up in the sunny skies of Washington, D.C. Imagine you're standing on the National Mall, you look up, and you see a fleet of blue and gold helicopters flying low over the Potomac River. These belong to the 1st Helicopter Squadron, codenamed Muscle. Now, most tourists just snap a photo, probably assuming they're ferrying some VIPs to a routine meeting or something. But their primary mission is actually much darker. Today, we're taking a suspenseful descent into America's shadow Pentagon. Because, well, these helicopters exist for one terrifying reason: to whisk a very specific, highly classified list of government VIPs away to safety if nuclear bombs are incoming. We're talking the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the communications officers holding the actual nuclear launch codes. If an attack is imminent, these choppers will literally sweep them off rooftops and deliver them to a hardened bunker in the mountains in a matter of minutes. And here is the brutal, unspoken reality of this entire plan. They take this specific list of people, and you, me, and everyone else, we stay behind. There's such a stark contrast in how these structures were conceived. Think about it. Every other government building in Washington, the White House, the Capitol, the actual Pentagon, is built on the implicit, hopeful assumption that America will survive. But the facility those helicopters are flying toward, officially designated Site R and commonly known as Raven Rock, is entirely different. It's America's shadow Pentagon, built on the incredibly grim assumption that Washington, D.C. might just cease to exist. It was designed specifically so that after the country is destroyed, someone is left alive to order the retaliation. Part 1. Blasting the Secret Fortress. Engineering the descent. Let's move down to the surface of a mountain in Pennsylvania and see how this Cold War paranoia physically took shape. Tracing the timeline of this project, the sheer speed is just staggering. In 1950, President Harry Truman realized a centralized command in D.C. was a massive liability. So by 1951, the government had already seized 1,100 acres on a 1,500-foot greenstone ridge right on the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. They actually tried to use a cover story, telling the locals they were just building a tunnel. But as you can imagine, that completely failed because the controlled demolition of the mountain's interior was so massive that neighbors reported the blasts were literally knocking them out of bed. Despite labor strikes and accidental deaths, by 1954, they had poured roughly $35 million into hollowing out this fortress. So to really understand what Raven Rock does, it helps to compare it to the famous Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. Cheyenne Mountain is essentially the sensory organ, right? It's the radar, the early warning apparatus, constantly watching the skies for incoming missiles. But Raven Rock is the response mechanism. It isn't just watching, it's the hardened, subterranean brain where the actual terrifying decision to prosecute a nuclear war would be made. It's not just a backup server somewhere, it is the ultimate instrument of survival and retaliation. Part 2. Inside the Shadow Pentagon. 30-ton doors and floating buildings. Let's descend even deeper now, leaving the quiet Pennsylvania forest above and step inside the completely closed system of this subterranean fortress. As you enter one of the 4 tunnel portals, you're immediately met with massive, curved blast doors. Just try to picture the sheer weight of these things. 30 tons of steel and concrete, over 3 feet thick. And they're designed to swing shut with a deafening thud in mere seconds. Once they close, you are sealed inside a tomb-like, overpressurized void. That means if there's a breach, the air is forced out, keeping any radioactive fallout and chemical agents from getting in. It is a total engineering marvel, but it's kind of wild to think about what it actually looks like inside. Visitors have described it as a really austere environment. Basically, a boring 1960s office building that happens to have a library, a medical clinic, and, absurdly enough, a badminton court for surviving the apocalypse in style. But the craziest part is right beneath your feet, the seismic spring isolation system. The 5 3-story buildings inside aren't actually touching the cave walls or the floor. They sit on thousands of heavy-duty steel springs. The floors are totally disconnected from the mountain, designed to literally float in the dark and move independently to absorb the devastating shockwaves of a nuclear blast. Part 3. The Endless Night Watch. Life in the Closed System. As we sink further into the depths of Site R, we really have to talk about the psychological toll of keeping this massive machine running. Because someone always had to be down there, ready to activate the systems in a matter of minutes. They called this continuous rotation the Night Watch. And living in a windowless void takes a huge toll. Workers described the air inside as recycled and dead. It was technically perfectly clean, sure, but it had zero biological complexity. No smell of rain, no soil, just the endless sterile scent of floor wax and ozone, accompanied by the ceaseless low hum of the ventilation systems. This sensory deprivation led to what the staff called mountain sickness, which was the slow, claustrophobic flattening of perception that crept in from having absolutely nothing natural to perceive. And that psychological tool extended far beyond the bunker's walls. During the first major continuity of government drill in the summer of 1954, cabinet officials were rushed to the helicopters, but their wives hadn't been told the purpose of the exercise, and they had absolutely no place in the evacuation plan. A group of them ended up spending a chilly afternoon playing poker, slowly coming to the horrific realization that their husbands were rehearsing leaving them behind in a nuclear holocaust. And that rule, it remains strictly in place today. If the helicopter comes, you go alone. Part 4. Chaos on September 11. When the doors swung shut. 50 years after its construction, let's look at what happened on the morning of September 11, 2001. For decades, Raven Rock was just a rehearsal space. But on 9/11, those 30-ton blast doors swung shut for the very first time in a real-world crisis. And the thing is, in theory, the continuity of government plan was meticulously clean. In practice, it was absolute chaos. Human nature utterly fractured this elaborate, multi-billion-dollar architecture. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was supposed to evacuate to Site R, but he refused, famously saying, "That's what deputies are for," as he personally pulled bodies from the burning Pentagon. Vice President Dick Cheney refused his off-site facility and stayed under the White House. Speaker of the House Dennis Hastert went to a bunker but was completely unreachable. And Commerce Secretary Don Evans, he literally just sat on his couch and watched the apocalypse unfold on TV. It turns out that evacuating leadership and maintaining control of the country were mutually exclusive scenarios. And for the people who did make it inside Raven Rock, like Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, a terrifying flaw awaited them. They were trapped in a mountain that had suffered a full decade of post-Cold War neglect. Once locked inside, they realized the computers were still running on Cold War-era architecture. The systems couldn't connect to modern databases, phone lines were insufficient, and incredibly, they couldn't even hold a secure video call. This facility, designed to command a global nuclear war in the 1960s, was completely, terrifyingly digitally isolated in 2001. That failure eventually sparked an $80 million emergency upgrade. Part 5. Who gets saved? The paradox of survival. We've now reached rock bottom of our descent, bringing us to the absolute darkest philosophical abyss of the entire continuity of government plan. The whole system forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. When you look at how the government meticulously ranked what mattered most, it's pretty jarring. Specially trained park rangers had standing orders to save the Liberty Bell. The National Archives actually decided the Declaration of Independence was a higher priority for extraction than the Constitution. Even the Gettysburg Address and George Washington's military commission outranked you. The general public, firmly, officially not included in the plan. President Dwight Eisenhower had recognized this grim reality years prior, bluntly stating that if nuclear war came, the nation wouldn't even have enough bulldozers to scrape the bodies off the street. I want to leave you with this haunting paradox to ponder. What is the point of a government that outlives its own country? What orders is a surviving commander actually issuing, and to whom? The terrifying answer from the continuity of government planners is simply that someone must remain alive to push the button for the retaliatory strike. And this isn't just some historical thought experiment. If you drive down the right roads in Pennsylvania today, you can actually see the heat from the diesel generators melting the snow. It is a living, breathing mountain that waits in the dark every single day, doors ready to slam shut, to fight a war for a country that is already gone.